Dear Miss ABID, dear Miss FISCHER, dear Miss Winter, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear students, colleagues, and friends. I would warmly welcome you all to this year's DASICON online conference, and more specifically to our panel on gender roles in religion. My name is Constanze. I'm a student at the Diplomatic Academy here in Vienna, and I'm part of the DASICON 2021 team, and feel very honored to guide and moderate you through this highly relevant and controversially debated topic on gender roles in religion. In recent years, many critical voices have been claiming that identifying oneself as a religious feminist is an oxymoron, that to be feminist is to reject the idea of a God-given role. However, there's the question rising, are certain religions more and more aware of gender inequalities and therefore promoting women empowerment in religion? With regards to recent events happening, for instance, a woman had been recently appointed as Undersecretary of the Synods of Bishops, and also, for the very first time in history, a woman had been appointed as Secretary General at the German Bishops' Conference lately. Our panel speakers from different religion backgrounds will reflect on this issue and share their opinions and expertise in an open and informative dialogue. So now finally we are already ready to get started, and I would kindly ask our three panelists to present themselves to our audience and share the introductory statement with us. First of all, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Winter.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you very much for having me. And thank you everyone who's joining today. So my name is Dana Winter. I was born in Vienna and lived there until I was 18. I am Jewish and I grew up in a Jewish household, and I was very involved in the Jewish community of Vienna growing up. I was very involved in a youth movement called Hashomer Hatzair, which is built on three pillars, which are socialism, Judaism, and Zionism, where I was very involved as a member and then a group leader, and participated in several international conferences with them. My family is what we would refer to as traditionally Jewish, which means that we believe in what Orthodox Judaism teaches us and sort of the older rules and the older traditions. However, I grew up not keeping all the rules. I wear jeans, my mother doesn't cover her hair, and so on, and I can get into that a little more later. I then, after I finished high school, moved to the United Kingdom, which is why I have a British accent, and have been living here for the past 6 years. I went to the University of Leeds to study for my bachelor's degree in management and marketing, and there wrote my undergraduate dissertation on I compared the consumer behavior and shopping behavior of Jewish, Muslim, and Christian women when it comes to clothes. My research was very short. The whole project was quite short, but it gave a lot of insight and really showed how every woman who shops for clothes, whatever religion she has and however she identifies in terms of religiousness level, nothing can compare and everything is different, everyone is different. It was a really interesting project. And I then went on to work for the Union of Jewish Students in the UK, which is a representative body of Jewish students in the United Kingdom, where I supported students across the country on several issues and projects, whether it was fun events, fighting anti-Semitism, and so on. I then went to do a master's at the London School of Economics in Culture and Society, and focused this on feminism, and specifically on feminism in advertising and how women who work in advertising experience feminism as a marketing and advertising strategy, which I think really brought together my passions for feminism and different traditions and how people apply that into their everyday life. Since graduating, my day job is that I work in PR and communications, and I'm also a vice president of the European Union of Jewish Students, in which capacity I'm here today, which is a pluralistic representative body of Jewish students and young adults across Europe. And what we do is we do lots of different things, from organizing events in different cities where we have parties and come together and have fun, to going into the EU Parliament, the UN in Geneva, and so on, leading different workshops and more. And in this capacity, I launched almost a year ago now, actually, in April last year, when lockdown sort of really kicked off across the world, the EUJS Women's Network. And the reason for that was that I have always been relatively confident in my feminism and my Jewish identity and bringing them together, and also my activism. However, I found that sort of working through the Jewish activism world, a lot of women and girls didn't feel like that. They almost felt like they had to choose. Do I want to be a feminist? Do I want to be a Jewish activist? Do I want to be an activist at all? How can I have my voice heard? And especially having people who get really, really involved and are super active when they're students, but then as soon as they sort of leave the student world and become professionals, feel like their voice can't be heard anymore, this can't be carried on anymore, they have to find a new organization or a new project sort of to really share their story. And I felt like that shouldn't be the case. You should be able to start being involved with who you want to be involved with and then carry that on. And I got that myself because most of my Jewish activist friends are the ones that I was already friends with in my youth movement. And we've been doing this together for so many years. And it really brings a whole other type of depth to the work that you do if you know each other well and really know what you believe in. And have been leading that for the past year with regular peer-led sessions with external speakers, and really seeing how we can work together, not only right now to work for feminism and feminism in Judaism, but also to carry that on and make this network hopefully be a network where women can get involved with when they're in their early 20s and stay involved with for years and years to come. I think I talked enough for now, but yeah, if anyone has any questions on anything I said, please feel free, and I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you very much. I'm sure there will be lots of questions afterwards. And now, Mrs. Fischer, I would like to hand the floor over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Irmtraud Fischer. I'm professor of Old Testament Hebrew Bible at the Catholic faculty at the University of Graz. In 93 of the last century, I was the first woman who did the habilitation under Catholic theology in Austria, also with a feminist scope. And then I was from 97 to 2004, I held a cathedra of Old Testament and Theological Women's Studies at the Catholic faculty of the University of Bonn in Germany. 2004, I moved to Graz, and where I was also at this university from 2007 to 11, vice rector of the field of research and continuing education, the third person responsible for students for a university of 30,000 students. Since 2017, I'm part of an international interdisciplinary graduate school with the Max Weber College at Erfurt. And in the same year, I received a Dr. Honoris Causa from Gießen University in Germany for merits in theological gender research and also a cultural historical approach to theology. But in this context, I want to present two of my projects. The one is the Interreligious Dialogue, and the other is the International Research Project, Bible and Women. This is a project that is published in 4 languages and 21 volumes, founded in the late 2006. Now we have 60 volumes in German just published, and more than 300 researchers worldwide are participating at the work. It is a reception history of the Bible, mainly with 3 aspects. The one is female biblical figures and how they were understood during the history till now. The next, how women read the Bible. They ever read the Holy Scriptures, but it wasn't included in the official tradition. That's another thing, but they always read this. and gender-relevant topics, especially gender-relevant topics such as pure and impure, or the official positions in religious communities. The second relevant project in this context, in your context, is the interreligious dialogue. This was an initiative we decided with an international board that we have called it Religious Discourses in Western Democracies. It's an initiative, Christian-Jewish Study Week, but in dialogue with Islam. And we have, in this year, in July, we have the third conference of this. The first was dedicated to conflict and peace, the next on gender in religion. And this year we will have eating and drinking, and also feasting and fasting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, as our third panelist, I would like to hand over the floor to Ms. ABID.
Yes, hello to everyone, and shalom and salam to my colleagues on this panel, and peace, of course. And thank you very much for inviting me to this panel, and it's an honor for me to speak on this conference. I have a few slides for you, which I will keep short in order not to take up too much of your time and allow for questions. I hope you can share the slides now with me. When we talk about Islam and gender equality, justice, we have to note that it's not only religion, but various overlapping and interacting factors that shape or influence the situation of women in any community or society, and of course also of Muslim women. Therefore, it's important to take intersectionality into consideration, and it becomes an important approach, not only in research, but also in emancipation and empowerment efforts. Like, for instance, in migration situations, in combating the repercussions of post-colonial fault lines still existing in Muslim majority countries, and in cooperation with and between women of other religions and all walks of life. Thank you. Next slide, please. The situation of women is, Muslim women especially, is shaped and influenced by many different factors. It's not just religion. It's tradition, patriarchy, religion, of course, also, customs such as gender segregation, also recent emancipation efforts, different judicial systems and national legal provisions or restrictions, and very important from my point of view, the social class and access to education and information, which is closely connected to the social class. And then, unfortunately, consequences and conflicts and effects of upheavals, such as the so-called Arab Spring, which has unfortunately almost turned into the opposite. And many more factors, such as migration, climate change, economic problems, and female poverty. Next slide, please. There are different perceptions when it comes to Muslim women. In majority societies of the Western Hemisphere, Muslim women, as the other, are often considered as being oppressed, dependent, family-centered mainly, and especially when it comes, when they become the visual other, when, for instance, wearing a headscarf or traditional clothing, but also by the color of their skin sometimes. On the other hand, Muslim communities also have their biases towards the other. And they are sometimes idealizing a traditional and supposedly typical feminine role, while the actual social relations and gender relations in their societies have already undergone marked change. And this traditionalist, idealized, so-called role of women in Islam can impose restrictions on women, such as seclusion and gender segregation, or a set of taboos which have little or nothing to do with religion. Next slide, please. Yes, and then I'm often confronted with the question, and I pose this question to myself, is Islamic feminism possible? I would say yes. If we consider feminism as a movement which strives for gender justice and gender equality in the widest sense, it is possible. And its claims can be substantiated by rereading the Quran from a woman's perspective, of course, because for centuries the Quran with a male perspective. And we also have to scrutinize religious narratives transmitted from the early period of Islam. And however, we have to go beyond the guidelines of faith. We have to consider the realities of life in today's world and in our societies. Next slide, please. When interpreting the Quran, especially when women are interpreting the Quran, which today fortunately happens more and more often, we arrive at the tricky question of competence. Very often we are confronted with remarks like, is she really competent, and so on, and what's the background, and so on. But we have to say that there are no gender differences in spirituality and on the level of religious ethics in Islam. But there are differences in women's rights. And in order to secure women's rights, female Muslim theologians are devoting in-depth research to a new gender-sensitive exegesis, which is also based on hermeneutic approaches. They push the borders of interpretation to arrive at an understanding of the sacred text, which is compatible with our time and development of society and without sacrificing the ethical tenets of their religion. Next slide, I think. Yeah, and then social change is an important factor. It is happening in Muslim majority countries at a swift pace. It is caused by globalization, by the social stratification, and the gap between rich and poor. It occurs due to the impact of social media and the access to information. And for Muslim minority communities in the European context, social change is caused by the generation gap. It starts with the empowerment of girls through better education and with the presence and participation of women in society, which is fortunately becoming stronger, female employment, economic independence, which are very important in all efforts for empowerment. There are other factors which can change traditional family structures. Especially enhanced legal security of women through support institutions such as legal counseling, measures against domestic violence, safe houses, for instance, and very important also social security in old age, in prolonged illness, right now, like in the the COVID crisis that we are witnessing, in homelessness, of course, also. And the availability of these services is crucial, but to access it might be limited or impossible even for refugee populations and during migration. In the process of integration, trust needs to be built to enable women to make full use of these options. Next slide, please. Education has a key role. We have already heard it this morning. And there is a famous saying of Prophet Muhammad, it is to strive for knowledge is a sacred duty for every Muslim, man or woman. We have an ideal sometimes that is brought forward by Muslim writers that women can pursue the same religious studies in Islam and can reach the same scholarly ranks as men. But and with due competence, again, we arrive at the question of competence. They are equally entitled to interpret the Quran, for instance, and sacred textual sources. But the reality looks quite different because only very few female theologians reach highest scholarly ranks, and the validity of their interpretations is often questioned. But we have new developments, of course, when female literacy is increasing and higher education becomes more easily accessible, especially for the younger generation. But however, there are still marked differences between countries and in mixes between urban and rural areas. We have also heard it in the panels this morning. And local conflicts, unfortunately, remain the biggest hindrances for human development. And for development. Next slide, please. Strategies that Muslim feminists or Islamic feminists pursuing. We note that some women's rights activists, especially in Muslim countries, prefer not to be called feminists because against a certain historical background in different countries, feminism might be associated with colonial reminiscences. Feminism might also be considered as a spearhead of so-called westernization and of post-colonial foreign influence. And feminism might also be misunderstood as advocating conflicts between the sexes, between men and women, between a variety of sexual orientations, and thus destroying normal family life. Yes, next slide, please. And in view of all this, we have to consider that women's rights activists and Islamic feminists are first and foremost human rights activists. And since one of the basic tenets of Islam is justice on all levels, a purpose-based, justice-oriented exegesis should serve to establish gender justice. Female role models from the history of Islam can be appropriated as of independent thinking and independent action to break up an entrenched patriarchal understanding of women's roles. And there are points of reference that need to be rediscovered in Islamic history to the effect of gender equality, but also democratization, good governance, and human rights. Next slide, please. And I'm close to finish my presentation. In public discourses and in the media, where I predominantly work for the time being, and in gender policies, criticism of women's rights abuses, human rights violations, and deficits is very important, but it should be unbiased, and generalizations should be avoided. Let's deal with problems and faults without blaming the other, the Muslims, or the other, whoever it might be. Criticism should allow for a productive workup and exchange of opinion. And we need fairness without polemics. We need avoidance of double standards. Last slide, please. Yes, I thank you for your attention, and I close with this postcard that I like very much. Freely translated, we could say that it means emotion says respect is a matter of the head or of the brain, maybe. And you see 4 people with different head covers, and what we need is respect for each other and good cooperation. Thank you very much. I didn't introduce myself, I'm sorry, but we can do this later. The slides were coming so quickly, so there wasn't really time for it, but we can do it in the question sessions if you like.
Okay, I see that we have already collected a lot of questions, and thank you very much again for your inputs. I would like to hand over the floor to Sarah Bamberger, who has a question.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to pose a question regarding a rather recent event, maybe to you, Professor Fischer. Last Sunday, supporters of the movement Maria 2.0 posted their demands in the 7 theses on church doors across Germany, and they are demanding for equality and a change of the traditional power structures, as they could for East, for example. So my question would be, how would you classify the impact of this movement? And do you think this movement will bring about a change?
I only heard that it was going on Maria 2.0, but
yes. And I wanted to ask, how would you classify the impact of this movement? And do you think this movement will finally bring about a change?
I strongly support them because it's one of the grassroots initiative, and not only an academic as we do it since half a century, we may say, but this is a grassroots initiative, and is also heard by the media. Also, this is another thing that it was before. And I think it's also heard now by some bishops. And if it will change, this is a case of the Codex Juris Canonicis, is that the Christian Catholic Christian book of legislation book, and there is always said that women have do not have the same right. That's clear. And every little thing it's allowed now to women is got a high hype in media. But yes, I'm that my only reaction is this.
Okay, so it seems there's still a long way to go, and
Yes.
it's only going small, step by step.
Only to change the legal condition would change something.
Thank you very much for your honest words. Next question, Tobias Meyer would have one.
Yes, thank you. I would like to ask all 3 of you to imagine in the year 2021 equal access to the key positions in the religion. So to be becoming a priest, a rabbi, or an imam will be granted to women. Would that be accepted by the base of believers or not?
I would just suggest starting with Ms. Winter as initially.
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to caveat that whatever I'm going to say, I'm not a religious professional, and all I know is from sort of self-education and what I've grown up with. I've not studied theology or studied to be a rabbi in any capacity. So interestingly, it is in Judaism, we have 3 main denominations. So we would differentiate between Orthodox Judaism, Reform, and Liberal. The difference is that Orthodox, and then there's also conservative, so 4. The difference is the interpretation of the laws. So Orthodox Judaism is what is, I think, most commonly known as Judaism, and also represents the biggest percentage of Jews around the world. And then the other 2 are different interpretation of the rules. As far as I know, I grew up in an Orthodox household, as I mentioned previously. From what I'm aware of, in liberal, Reform, and conservative Judaism, it is completely possible equally for a woman to become a rabbi, and has been for several years. The women who are rabbis in those denominations have the exact same rights and privileges and responsibilities as a male rabbi would. So it is currently possible for a woman to be a rabbi in those denominations, and there are several, and I know them, and they are really inspirational women who do amazing work. In Orthodox Judaism, it's a little bit more complicated because it's the most traditional, the oldest version of Judaism, with the laws not being really updated. The difference between the other denominations is that people have said, well, the way that we are interpreting the laws is outdated. It doesn't work with the current world. It doesn't work with the late 20th century and 21st century. And because of that, there aren't really as many women who are rabbis. However, there are some, because there are certain laws that there's no law that says a woman can't do the studying that a man can to become a rabbi. The way that we become a rabbi is through a degree, basically. I could become Dr. Winter if I did a PhD, and I could become Rabbi Winter if I did the studying to become a rabbi. However, then the problem that comes with that is that once you have the education, there are certain laws that are interpreted in a certain way, or might explicitly say that a woman can't lead a service in a synagogue, for example, because there is a certain law that says, I think that is one of the main reasons why a woman in Orthodox Judaism can't lead a service, is because the service is led by singing, and a man shouldn't be hearing a woman's singing voice because it's not modest. It's not modest, which obviously leads to a lot of other complications of interpretation. But so that is the issue. And the issue is also that often people who are very traditional, very strongly believing Orthodox Jews will not accept a female rabbi from a different denomination. But similarly so, they will not accept any really things done from a different denomination in many cases, because they will say, you are not using the rule the way that it is given to us by God. However, there are other people who will say, well, I accept a different denomination of Judaism just as much as I accept someone being a Christian, someone being a Muslim. So there's, within Judaism, it's such a complicated faith, and it's so much more than just obviously nothing is just a religion, but it's so much more than that. Then that interpretation of rules is so diverse that it's really difficult to give a black and white answer. I hope this answers your question somewhat, and is not even more confusing. But yeah, there are several female rabbis that I know that are fantastic, and we are on the way to make it more of a norm and a mainstream, I'd say.
Yes, there are many similarities between Islam and Judaism in this respect, really. Female imams, there is no problem with women leading a prayer for women, for a congregation of women, and also with reciting the Quran in this context. But it's pretty much the same when there is a mixed congregation of prayers. Then the female voice should not be heard, although now on the media we have women reciting the Quran. And so it's pretty much, you know, there are female imams also in Germany. There are several ones, and they conduct services. It depends on, you know, some work on a very individual basis. There is also a liberal mosque with a female imam. It's also a big debate going on whether this is okay or not, and large part of the community, to say the truth, they would not accept it, or they would just not go to such a mosque. But I mean, there are a number of female imams, especially in Germany, also in other European countries, and even non-European, also in Asian countries, some of whom I know, and they are doing remarkable work. So it's work in progress. But for women, it's no problem that a woman leads the prayer, and even it's desirable. But, you know, it's a long way to go still. Thank you.
However, it's good to hear that there's progress going on. Ms. Fischer, the question was also directed at you.
It's also the same in Christianity. We have several churches where women are completely equally, as you may see at the Protestant church, or so many denominations, also the Old Catholic Church and all this. But the Orthodox and also the Catholic Church still now do not have the possibility. And there is, of course, this initiative just named Maria 2.0 is one of the initiatives who have pressure now on this. But there is also an international network, Water Women for offices, and there are many initiatives. But if you are always waiting for the last conservative, we will never have this. But this was the same with the anti-slavery movement in the 19th century. If you would have waited on the last who was against slavery, against the free slaves, we would have slavery till now. So
yeah, I agree on that. Thank you very much again. We have one more question from Brigitte Lager. You can take the floor.
Thank you. I would have a question to Ms. Winter, or to all the panelists, of course, but Ms. Winter, you said that for a lot of Jewish women, it is hard to choose between being a feminist or being Jewish or being religious. So my question would be, what in your opinion are the biggest obstacles a woman has to overcome in this process? And how can we, the society, help and empower women to overcome these obstacles? Thank you.
I think what I mentioned before was when I decided with a friend of mine who's also vice president of the European Union of Jewish Students to launch the EUJS Women's Network. It was because we especially thought there was an issue with people combining their feminism and women's activism and their Jewish student activism. So I think it's a different type of, sort of very specific type of people who are between the age of 18 and 30 or whatever, and are working in student politics and trying to make that sort of environment a better place. I think overall, combining Judaism and feminism comes with very similar issues, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it comes with very similar issues as combining feminism with any older traditional religion, because so many of the scriptures and also traditions and just the way that things are done are problematic in what we see today as what equality means. But these issues are also deeply rooted within society, whether someone identifies whatever religion they might identify with or none at all. They are still growing up in the same society, which is built on the idea of the woman stays at home and looks after the children, looks after the household, and the man goes out and he brings home the money and the food, and he's the one who studies and he's educated and he's the head of the house and all of that. I think it's very similar, the way that we've been brought up, whatever religion you identify with. I think in making people more confident in working towards equality and reaching the equality in a time closer, sooner rather than later, I personally think is actively addressing these issues and actively talking about what we can do. For example, yesterday I live with two friends and I was talking to them about this panel today, and we were discussing, what topics I could bring up, what would be interesting and all of that. And I was talking about how in Orthodox Judaism, in the synagogues that I belong to, a woman, as I mentioned before, a woman can't sing in front of men. A woman can't lead a service. And then I said to my male housemate, I have no desire personally to do that, but it would be nice to know that I could if I wanted to. And then he said to me, well, do you actually not? Or is it because it's so ingrained in you? And it really got me thinking, because I'm not attention shy. I don't mind speaking in front of people on Zoom or in person. So why is this one thing that really does lead, it's a very attention-y position, why do I not have a desire to that? And I think it really will help and really forward the progression of equality and actively addressing these issues and actively talking about them, rather than just saying, well, that's the way it's always been, let's try to tackle a new issue and then not address, you know what I mean? Like, let's just give women in a different type of Judaism the opportunity to be a rabbi, but not address the older version of it. And I think that's a real issue, that these old ingrained things aren't being tackled. I think that would really help, and especially within those communities, to talk about it. Yeah, if you have any more like thoughts on specifically like student activism, I can talk more about that. But overall, I think those are my thoughts.
Unfortunately, time's flying, and we will finish our panel with one wrap-up question from my colleague Esther Mahdi. You can take the floor.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I have a question for Mrs. Liz, and it's about Islamic feminism. And in post-colonial studies, it has been researched that feminism is described and sometimes defined and imposed as a Western concept. Do you think that Islamic feminism does not exist just because there is no room for definition for this kind of feminism?
Pointed out in my small presentation that actually there are misgivings about feminism in Muslim societies. That is true, due to considering feminism as Western influence, as post-colonial concept and things like that. But we have increasingly more young women who, even in Muslim societies, Muslim countries, and especially among Muslim minorities in Europe, who do not hesitate to consider themselves a feminist, because it depends very much on the definition. As I said, if we consider feminism to be a movement for gender equality, which we really need, then yes, we can be feminists, and this is what we can choose. Of course, it does not mean to give up our religion. I mean, it's always a question of how you define feminism, but as a movement to secure women's rights, yes, feminism is really needed also in Muslim societies in this context. And actually, as I said, I didn't introduce myself, but I've been involved in women's rights discourses from a long time, since a long time, and from the time when I converted to Islam. And it's a very exciting field of activism and of research also that I'm still engaged in. And I hope that this situation will become more clear, what feminism is about, what we need in terms of women's rights, of gender equality, and these topics. Thank you. I hope I have answered this.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much. Now time would be up, but I see that we have so many interesting questions, and now this is really the final question for our panel today. It is from Ida Maria Jaritz, and I will read it out loud to you, and it's for the three of you. What do you suggest one could do to interest more women in fighting for women within religious communities? Most women just drop out because it seems so tedious to battle with the men of the church or other faith because other faith-based congregations. So if you want, I can read it out to you once again. Otherwise, we can do a quick wrap up with one statement of each of you. Ms. Winter, would you like to start again?
Sure, with pleasure. I think with anything in life that you want to achieve and that you want to change society, and I know this sounds quite almost like wishy-washy and a bit wishful thinking, but I genuinely believe that whatever you want to achieve, don't stop fighting for it, because if you're going to stop because you think someone else's voice is louder than yours, yeah, you're not going to get anywhere. If you want a job and you don't apply for one, you're not going to get one. So, you just have to continue doing it. And I think that's obviously easier said than done. But whether it comes to equality in society in general, in religion, in, as I said, getting a job, continuing fighting for it and finding the platform and the support group that really pushes you to the best of your abilities. So whether that is an organization such as the EUJS Women's Network, whether that is your community in your church, your mosque, or your synagogue, or whatever other religious institution you're a part of, whether that is a group of friends, whether that is your family, whatever it might be, I think it's just having that network that really believes in what you believe in and giving you that platform to talk about it and have your voice heard. Because if your voice needs to be louder than someone else's in order to achieve something, and don't be shy. Because again, if you're going to be shy and worried what's going to happen, well, if you're worried what's going to happen and don't do it, you're not going to find out. I know this is quite like loose but I hope you get what I'm trying to say. Is just don't stop trying.
Yeah, thank you very much for your motivation. Ms. Fischer, would you also like to comment and share a final statement with us?
I myself do this with my research. Researching that I'm giving back the women their history. So it's what we are discussing now are not new questions. Everybody thinks that these are new questions that are not new questions. We have in every epoch those questions, but they are silenced in every epoch. And I'm not sure if not also our generation, our panel now will be silenced. So that it is gone into history then. We have so many initiatives where just the Bible were questioned, or also the declaration of the first declaration of women's rights, Olympe de Gouges, was faded out. She was at the guillotine, and with her death, she was silenced. And feminist researchers in the 80s, not 40 years ago, have then explored in the archives, but it didn't have any had any impact. So we have a history. And my personal engagement is to give back women their history, so that we have really also to make clear that it is not true that these are all new questions we only now are asking.
Thank you for this panel, and it was really very inspiring for me. And what I would like to say as a final statement, and also in answer to the last question, yes, it's true that women leave religion, and the reasons, I mean, I do not think that it's just the status of women in the particular religion. Personally, I'm not a theologian, but I think to strive for women's rights is one important thing to show that it is possible. And one thing which is very important to me, I think women have to serve as peace builders in our communities, and between different other communities, between religions, on every level, actually. So feminism and to strive for women's rights and for equality, for me, it's part of peace work, you know, of peacemaking, which is very important, I think which we direly need. Thank you very much.
Well, a big thank you from our side again to the three of you. Thank you very much for your inspiration and your motivation. I think we could spend another hours on this topic. We will continue talking about gender inequality and women empowerment today, but on different topics. The next breakout sessions will talk about gender inequality during COVID time and gender diversity and inclusion, which will both start in around 5 and 10 minutes. Thank you very much again for your participation, and have a good day.